An injury-filled Iowa football spring practice is now in the books. I sit down with Iowa beat writer Tom Kakert of HawkeyeReport.com to discuss what we saw over the course of the last couple of weeks in spring ball. We also talk about the Iowa sports media, how the internet changed things back in the early 2000s, and Tom talks about who he's thankful for in helping him get started in his journey as an Iowa beat writer. All that and much more during part one of our sit down with Tom Kakert here at From the Hawkeye of the Storm, week 162 of Brada's Branded Thoughts. Are you a Hawkeye fan living in Story County? Do you feel isolated, like you're alone in a maze of red? Well, you're not the only one. And that's why we here at StoryCounty.news have launched a brand new section of our website, From the Hawkeye of the Storm, which will feature our weekly podcast, Brada's Branded Thoughts, as well as other Hawkeye-related content for all you Story County residents who bleed black and gold, or if you live in Western Iowa, Eastern Iowa, or somewhere else other than Ames and you're a Hawkeye fan, we'd love your support. All of our content is free, so again, give our Facebook page a follow, give it a like, and give our Twitter page a follow as well, at From the Hawkeye on Twitter. The more likes, the more follows, the more support we get, the more content we can continue to push out, and it's all free. It's From the Hawkeye of the Storm, hosted by StoryCounty.news, for the best Hawkeye content in the area. This is From the Hawkeye of the Storm and week 162 of Brada's Branded Thoughts. I'm joined by a legendary Iowa beat man in Tom Kakert from HawkeyeReport.com. And Tom, before we get into some Iowa spring football talk, and certainly we'll talk a little bit about the current climate with the Iowa basketball team, I do want to touch on your background for any of our listeners that don't know you or maybe have read your stuff and followed your stuff for many years. Of course, I'm a big fan of your podcast that you do with Matt Randazzo. Kind of tell our listeners how you got into, first of all, covering the beat and how you found your way to Iowa.
Well, I grew up in Iowa,
Okay.
grew up in Quad Cities, grew up in Davenport and went to Iowa, mid 80s. It was a good time to be a Hawkeye student when you had, the Dr. Tom Davis era getting going, and you had Hayden Fry and guy I got lucky enough to spend some time with last night at his charity auction function. Chuck Long quarterbacking the Hawkeyes to the Rose Bowl, and Dan Gable was at the height of his powers, and C. Vivian Stringer was coming on. I mean, it was just a great time to be an Iowa fan, an Iowa student. So, got done with school, came back here, got into like social work and stuff like that. And just, met some, that was kind of when sports radio was getting started. So, I called into sport. I was a big sports fan. So I called into sports radio. I talked about Iowa stuff. And the guy that was running sports radio station, Dan Burrich, who was actually the guy who gave the really kind of, he's the reason that Matt Randazzo and I are friends. He's the reason that Matt Randazzo and I are successful in our chosen fields, because he gave us both the opportunity to do something. So Dan the Wild Man, as he was known, Dan the Wild Man Burrich, gave us start, and we owe him a huge debt of gratitude for what he did for us. And I started. So Dan didn't like going to Iowa games because he was actually doing part-time work, or he's working for one of the TV stations too, in addition to doing sports radio. So he's like, hey, can you go up and get me some sound? So I started going on his pass, and I'm like, I'll do this for free,
Yeah.
Just go up on the KJOC pass, and started going to games that way. Started writing a column in a local magazine around here called the Quad City Sports Connection.
Okay.
And doing that, like, that was like a monthly column, and then just kind of that was when the internet kind of took off too. That's when websites started happening, and John Miller was getting started about that same time, and John was not in the area, but I was, and I had access to a pass. And John and I started talking, and we're like, "Hey, I can help you out and do some stuff."
Yeah.
And so we kind of started, and then he was at Rivals, and John left to go to Scout, and the Rivals people asked me to stay on, and I was like, okay, I'll give this a shot. That was like spring of '03, and that was a difficult decision because John was a good friend, and he still is a good friend. But
Yeah.
it was just a decision I made, and hired Blair Sanderson, and we've been kind of a combo since the spring of '03, and just blessed to have him. He's the best in the business at what he does, and he's fantastic, and a good guy too. So yeah, we've been kind of trucking along since. It's hard to believe it's been since 2003, but I can't. I think about that. It was like around this time, 18 years ago, that I started doing this website thing full time, and been really lucky to have a great community, a lot of great people that I've met over the years, some great friends that I've made, that just owe so many people so much, and thank them for being a part of our community, our site, and hopefully we'll keep this going for a little while longer.
So, I mean, you talk about John Miller. I think of him and certainly yourself included in that boat as sort of the era that I don't want to say changed Iowa sports media, but
yeah,
I mean that was really the turning point with not just Iowa media, of course, but the era of the websites, as I call it.
Yeah.
What was that like? I mean, that was I mean, you obviously grew up in a different era than I did, so I can't really relate to that. This is sort of all I know. Talk about that change.
Yeah, I look back at those days, and it's just wild to think about, because it was so it was like you were in a frontier. I should mention too, Josh Clark was in that era
yep.
too. It was Josh, John, myself, the old Super Hawkeye.
Hawkeye, yep.
Was going. And it was just it was a fun time in those Sunday nights, where this was before social media, and this is when you're trying to chase down guys that once they get home, because most kids didn't have cell phones, and trying to get recruiting updates on a Sunday in January, after there's a big recruit weekend for football, and trying to chase people down. It was wild. I remember some stories, and we never did this, but I know sites that would go to the airport and meet the kids at the airport. When they were leaving town. That was was pre 9/11 kind of times, but even after that, right around '02, '03, kids were getting dropped off at the airport by the recruiting staff or the coaches, and they're checking in and checking in to get to their plane, and you'd have some sites out there camped out at the air. It's like TMZ almost,
right?
TMZ
for 17-year-olds.
Yeah, it was just it was a wild time, and it was this new thing, because the internet was this new toy that everybody was starting to get involved with, and starting to get on, getting email addresses and those sorts of things. And so recruiting was never covered the way that we were doing it, or that these websites were doing it. It was different, because recruiting was kind of this, I don't know, I guess cottage industry almost. It was like this little kind of niche audience, but it was a really passionate niche. There was a guy named Paul Betcher who did a newsletter for years, and we've got plenty of people on our site that used to get that newsletter. And it was like, when that thing arrived in their mailbox, it was like Christmas Day, because it had all this chock full of recruiting information on all the recruits and what these guys were doing, and who they might get. And And now you had a website and you could get that. You didn't have to wait for the mailbox. All you had to do was log on and you could find out about this recruit and that recruit. And, and as things grew, the camps started going and we'd be hitting camps and for basketball and for football and just so many great experience. And then being able to, at that time too, we're still kind of like the internet guy. I remember that Kirk did that to me early on when he called after the press conference. I had asked a question in like the scrum afterwards, and he said something to like Phil Hattie or something, the internet guy, and and I was like, oh, okay, you kind of had to. The one thing I've just been really fortunate because I the guys that were. I'm a big newspaper guy. I still am. I love newspapers. I love the guys who write for the newspapers. They're all over the years been just thrilled to call them many of those guys friends and get accepted by those guys relatively quickly in my career when I started doing this full time in 2003. And just and the thing I've always tried to do is just keep my head down, do my job, just and not be too boastful. I'm proud of what we've done, 100% proud of what we've done and what we've accomplished. But I also know that I got to go out and earn it every day, and I got to show up every day. And that's kind of that's the life of a beat writer. There's no days off. You got to keep working. I know people like to say, I'm grinding. You just show up and keep working hard, and eventually people will recognize your work. That's what you hope for. And I think it was a right time, right place for me, for us, for what we did. And I'm just really fortunate. I mean, it's been so much fun being at so many of these great, the great games in Iowa history, and being the things I'll never forget. And someday I'll write columns about these things, like the Cap One Bowl when Drew Tate throws the ball. I'm literally standing on the sidelines next to Rob Brooks, who's doing the and then we see his dad Bob sprinting down the field, and we don't know exactly what happened, but we know that Iowa just won the game. And it's just, and I'll never forget looking down when the clock was ticking, and I'm thinking the same thing that Gary Dolphin was.
Gotta call timeout.
And I look down and I see Carl Jackson trying to signal timeout, and nobody does it. And and the play goes off, and I'm like, holy cow! Because I'd said right before that, I'm like, Rob, they're not gonna. The clock's gonna start when they set the ball. They got to call a timeout. And he's like, I don't think anybody knows. And then we looked at Carl, and it was just there's so many fun moments, becoming, just being able to cover some fun teams, some fun players over the years. It's been just a thrill the entire time. I can't think of a bad, you get pissy about some things, but it's just, I got the best job in the world. I do. I really do.
So how many times, and not to turn this conversation to a sour note, but how many times in the past year have you just gotten completely ripped by somebody? How many? I mean, if you had to count them up and you had to tally them, how many times have you gotten ripped on Twitter, your message boards, social media? I mean,
it's all the time. People disagree with you all the time. They'll say that you're bad.
And it's personal. It always goes personal, doesn't it? It's always personal.
And I always, when you, the thing I used to, I would never say I was a great debater in high school, but I was a pretty good high school debater.
Yeah.
And my mentor, the guy that I think is the most responsible for me having the confidence to do what I do today, and even stand up and talk in front of people. And I was a pretty shy kid growing up, and kind of awkward at times, I think. But my speech and debate coach, Harold C. Keller, Davenport West, and he it was one of those things where I was kind of all the people that I surrounded myself with at when I was in high school. I mean, I'm literally the people that were in debate with me were people who are now doctors, lawyers, successful business people. I mean, they're the millionaires. I mean, they're
Yeah.
all just massively successful people. And some of them will always tell me, yeah, but you've got the better job,
Mm-hmm.
because I
Yeah.
get to do this, this is like everybody's dream job. And if you would have told me in high school or junior high, what would you want to do? And I would have told you probably one of two things: cover the University of Iowa athletics, or cover the Chicago Cubs. Those would have been my two dream jobs. No, either one of those.
Yeah.
Been a dream job for me. So it's just a dream for me.
So when you were growing up, I mean, you said you were kind of shy at times and didn't really like to speak up, I guess. I mean, how that has changed. I mean, you with your job, you are
Oh yeah.
literally the opposite of that. I mean, you
Yeah.
have to you're on the radio, you've got a podcast. So I mean, and in addition to everything else you do
We used
with
to do a
the
TV
website,
show. We used to do a
yeah,
TV show on MediaCom.
that's a transformation. I mean, that was
It is. I was a really awkward kid. My parents got divorced when I was, in my 9, 10 years old, somewhere around there, and just led to some awkward years. It just did, and it just wasn't all that fun. It wasn't comfortable. It was not a good time for our family,
yeah.
and but we made it through, and um, yeah, it's. I'm just really lucky, really fortunate, to be able to do what I do every day, and my wife, kids, they support me in what I do, and one of the great thrills that I've had since I've been a beat writer was my son Jack got to be a ball boy for 3 years for the Iowa basketball team.
Oh,
And it was just he had asked because he had saw these guys, younger guys like that, and
yeah.
I said, you can go ask Fran, and if you can do that. And he asked, and it was just fun that he could come to work with me
Mm-hmm.
for
Yeah.
home games, and I could see him down there having fun, making friends.
He'll
Just
always remember that. I mean,
yeah,
that will never leave him.
yeah, and that was some fun teams, and he got to know all those guys, Devin Marble and Mike Cassell, and Mike's our good friend. He's living here in the Quad Cities now. He's a really good friend, and Woodbury, and the Woodbury family were great to him.
Yeah.
All those guys, they loved hanging out with him, and so it was and Fran was great with him. So it was a fun time for us. We could go to games together, and we could talk about games afterwards when we were driving home, and because that's one of the hard parts for me is in the fall, Saturdays I'm busy. Saturdays a work day, almost every Saturday, and during the basketball season I'm gone quite a bit. So it was a challenge, but being able to work from home is a benefit because I can see them off to school, and most days I'm home when they come home from school. So it's good. It's got this job has its benefits, and that's really one of them.
That's I kind of wanted to touch on. You mentioned Fran and how he's been with you. I mean, over the years, there is as you know, I don't want to call it a national narrative with Fran McCaffrey, but there's a narrative with Kirk, and certainly this past year kind of shifted the narrative with Kirk. What have been your personal experiences? Again, not talking to you from perspective of someone who has to report the facts, but your personal experiences with both. I mean, it sounds like you had tremendous experiences with Fran. I mean, what has that been like you're not working under Fran and Kirk, but they're a huge part of your career. So what has that been like?
Yeah, with every coach, you're going to get sideways with them every once in a while, to borrow a Franism. you're gonna have them that they're gonna be pissed off at you. You're not doing your job if they don't get pissed off at you every once in a while. And I know Fran and I have gotten sideways a few times, but more the thing that's great about both those guys is they're never grudge holders.
Yeah.
They might not like something you write or something you say, but you talk about it like mature adults and you move on. And Fran's been great. He really has. He's a good guy. He really is a good guy. Kirk is I had a funny Kirk Saturday when he started talking about the new college football rules that are coming in for fall camp. I don't know if you've heard about this, but they're going to cut down the number of times that they can have hitting in practice and be in full pads. Cut it down to 8 times you can be in like full pads, and it goes from 21 to 8. So you're cutting it down to a third of what it used to be. And Kirk obviously not in favor. And he kind of brought it up, and I was having covered him for a long, long time. I knew he wanted more. He wanted to go.
Yeah. Yep.
So I asked him a question. I said, "Seems like you want to talk about this. Let's go. Let's hear it." And he goes, so he went on for about 5 minutes about he got on his soapbox about it, like he's gotten on his soapbox about not understanding the cut block rules. And so we're walking out, and I said, "Hey, Kirk, see you soon." And he's like, "Thanks for asking. I wanted to talk about that stuff today." I go, I know you do. I've been around you enough. I know when you want to go down that road. But yeah, Kirk's been great. I mean, I did when his 20th anniversary, that 20th year head coach, he was really kind enough to let me come in and sit down with him for about an hour. And we just reminisced about some of the games and some of the the days of different games and different influences. And I made him cry, and I felt guilty about that.
I think everybody makes him cry. That's okay.
He's
a soft guy. He really is. I mean,
he's as genuine and good guy as you'll find. And
so how hard was it? I mean, last year, again, taking it from your personal standpoint. Look, I know you're a beat writer as it were, but you are also a human being that has an attachment to this university and to obviously Kirk and the staff. So, I mean, how difficult was that for you? And I mean, what did you take away from that whole off-season experience?
It was gut wrenching because, I venture to say I probably spent more time with Chris Doyle than anybody else on this beat.
Okay.
Every year in the early 2000s, pretty much the summer, I would go in and sit down with Chris for an hour and do a thing on what's new in strength and conditioning. It was something they were marketing. They were clearly trying to market it, and and I was fascinated by Chris in the work he was doing, and so were our readers. So I would go in, and Chris always looked forward to it too. He was like, "Let's sit down. I love sitting talking with you." And he has been tremendous to me over the years. He really has. And I did a thing with him on the 20th anniversary thing, and he was like, "Come on in. Let's sit down. Let's chop it up for an hour." And we did. And it was a great interview, and talking about how he was sitting in the living room in 1998 or 99 or whatever it was out in Utah with his wife, and saying, I think we're going to be moving to Iowa, and just talking about that and thinking about how that might happen. So it was that's a story I never asked him about, and so it was fun to talk to him about that 20 years in. So yeah, the thing that's troubled me about the whole thing, or that's been the hardest part, is to see so many friends, teammates kind of pitted against each other in some ways because their experiences were different.
Yeah.
And I don't know if those wounds will ever, I hope they'll heal. I do. I hope they will. But that's the tough part, was just, seeing how that's kind of fractured some friendships and so in a brotherhood, at least at this time. And until that lawsuit gets settled, and I think that will probably just get settled. I think that one's going to be there. And I don't know if there'll ever be any closure. And then it just, it got opened up again when Chris was down in Jacksonville. And, that was, that kind of came back, and it's too bad. But like I wrote at the time, once that happened, Chris had to go. There was just no choice. There was just no choice.
I agree with you. Yeah.
However you felt about it, there was just no path forward with Chris Doyle there, unless there just wasn't. Regardless of if you thought that what those guys were saying was a load of crap and not unfair. The thing with Chris is that, because I've heard it from Black players and white players, Chris was kind of an ass to everyone. He pushed your buttons, for every Black guy that he said he was going to send back to the ghetto, I'll show you a white guy that he said he was going to send back to the trailer park.
Right.
He kind of, a friend of mine said he kind of trafficked in the tropes, kind of the stereotypes, and but I'll tell you what, he's still, there's a reason Urban Meyer wanted him. He's still great at what he does. He really is. And the smartest guys I've been around. He's the guy that got them reading books and teaching lessons from, the All Blacks and from the different leadership books. And he evolved over the years too. But he made mistakes, and I always say, the thing that I always come back to is, it's the world changed, and I'm not sure that he changed with it, in the way that kids train today. Every one of these kids has their own private trainer. They do. They have these workout guys, whatever you call them. They're guys. They're paying them. They're paying these guys. And if you're paying these guys, those guys are not going to be an ass to you. They're not gonna F-bomb you. They're not gonna tell you traffic in anything. They're just gonna it's gonna be more positive. So then you get to Iowa, and you got this guy who's a ball buster, who's gonna come after you a little bit and push your buttons. But for 8 years I've been working out with this trainer, and all he's done is just kiss my butt. Now I've got this guy that's like a drill sergeant. I don't know. It's just, that's and 10 years ago, we didn't have these personal workout guys. We didn't have these trainer guys. Sure. We didn't have these guys. It was all the strength coaches at your place, and they were all kind of cut from that cloth. And now it's different, and you just gotta evolve. And I think that was part of it. I really do. I think there's, I'm not excusing anything Chris did. If he did stuff that was untoward to those kids, I feel bad for him. But a lot of those guys, and some of those guys I know, and I know some of the guys, and they told me stories, and I was like, okay. But I know a lot of other guys, but it wasn't, it was kind of universal, but Iowa needed to relax some of the things that they did. I always joked, more than once, joining Iowa football was like joining the Army. And there was a lot to that, because everything was kind of Iowa issued, government issued. You had to wear your Iowa gear around the facility. Now you're seeing guys wearing their high school stuff, and different things when they're showing up on Zooms. That you're on those Zooms too. You see them. They're wearing different things. So it's a lot different. And it's it hasn't impacted performance to this point. They went
Yeah.
6-2 last year. They were fine. They won the last 6 games. So I think it's going to be okay. I do. I think Kirk probably needed to relax some of these things because kids want to be a little freer, and that's okay. It really is okay.
But like you said, I mean, this was that whole summer. I mean, whatever it was, it felt like an eternity, but it really wasn't. I mean, the 2 or the 3 months leading up to what turned into fans turning their anger and frustration on the Big Ten, that was really eye-opening for me, because you're right. You had, I mean, and I'll throw their names out there because I mean they went public with this stuff. You've got guys like Ed Miles who are defending Kirk completely, and then you have the opposite. You've got Mari Spivey, or I mean, there, like you said, there's a lot of them. So yeah, I can see where you're coming from as far as building that road gap between these former athletes. And we had Clinton Solomon on in August, and I think he had the most balanced viewpoint maybe of anybody that I talked to about the issue, because his big thing was, he just didn't see black and white. So he didn't perceive what Chris Doyle was doing as racist. But he said, now I look back at it, okay, yeah, maybe it was racist. And I think that kind of brings us to the bottom line issue with this whole situation. Unfortunately, our circumstances or our experiences in our younger years shape how we perceive things. And that is true for not only the recipients, the players, but that's true for Chris Doyle and the era he grew up in, and what was acceptable then, like you said, is just not acceptable now, especially with what happened in 2021 or 2020 from a national social issue standpoint. So,
it's like, you go back and look at, it was funny. I was talking to somebody about this on Saturday. Cause I turned 55 this year, so I'm old. I'm an old dude. And, but I'll tune in some like old TV shows. Like you watch an old, like Tonight Show now, Johnny Carson.
Oh yeah.
And Don Rickles would never survive as a
No.
comedian. He would have gotten canceled. You could never make a show like All in the Family today.
Mm-hmm.
Because it would just be so politically incorrect.
Listen, I was watching Everybody Loves Raymond a few days ago, and I said to my wife, I'm like, that would never fly now.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking 20 years ago. So,
and I'm, it's a whole nother tangent. I'm just like, I think we're the pendulum swinging one way too much, and
there's just no balance with anything, unfortunately, in this world.
Yeah,
it's either black or it's white, and I don't mean that. I don't mean that. I hope nobody perceives that as a racial thing. No, I'm saying everything is one or the other, and there's nothing in between. So
there's no middle ground anymore, and there's no gray area, and it's and you make excuses for somebody who you like, and you find flaws for somebody you don't, and it's just it's craziness. It really is.
Well, let's talk a little bit about actual substance here, and football. I mean, we've got spring practice wrapping up, or has wrapped up now, and my big takeaway from spring, and I'll be anxious to get your viewpoint as well, being that you've covered the beat for so long. Were there more injuries this year than in past spring practices? It just seems like a lot of guys were out, not only when we saw him 2 weeks ago, but when we saw him yesterday. Or am I exaggerating that?
The connection was really bad. Can you repeat that?
I was just saying, did it seem like there were more guys out with injuries this year than in past seasons?
Oh, yeah. And it was wild. It was wild because even Kirk said that, because last year they were really healthy most of the year.
Yeah.
And it was both times, and it was especially noticeable on the offensive and defensive line. It was like both those positions just got gutted this spring,
Mm-hmm.
which is unfortunate because those are probably the two positions that they needed to get
Yeah.
everybody healthy and get them out there, and especially the defensive line. And you're down to like 8 healthy bodies maybe for the defensive line, and maybe 8 or 9 for the offensive line. And you wanted to get a look at some of these guys. You wanted to get a look at Yahweh Black. You wanted to get a look at Logan Jones, Logan Lee.
Mm-hmm.
You wanted to get a look at some of those guys, Chris Reams. You wanted to get a look at some of the like Justin Britt on the offensive line.
Yeah.
You wanted to see what those guys could do. Cody Ince was another one. You want to see him at tackle, see if he's ready to go. And now you got to just kind of kick that can to August. And by the way, now August, you might not be able to put helmets and pads on and hit each other. So you're going to kind of wishing, hoping, and praying that they're going to be ready if that comes to pass, if that piece of legislation becomes the law of the land in the NCAA. Yeah, it's going to be a problem. So just from that aspect, it was weird. There's so many injuries this year. Just never seen a spring quite like that.
I mean, and the number of guys that were out, I mean, these didn't seem to be just, okay, they happened to pop up the week of that final practice, because it seemed like most of the guys who were out in the first open spring practice were out in the second spring practice.
Yeah, so, it was like, there was like Yelverton and God, there was somebody else too.
Is it Luke Lachey? Was he out? Did he play in the first one?
Yeah, he was there in the first one, but Elijah Yelverton was in the second one. Josiah Meeman was out in the first one, but that was for other issues.
Right.
More than injury. But Yelverton came back. I think there was one other guy maybe that kind of came back, but I can't remember who it was. But,
were you surprised at all with and maybe I'm just looking at, maybe I overreacted to the situation. Were you surprised at all that Josiah Meeman made it back on the field as fast as he did?
A little bit. I was actually.
Yeah, that I was as well.
He hit a lot of he you spin that wheel of trouble, and he hit like 3 or 4 things in that one: the fake ID, the playing the cop,
right?
Just he hit a lot of things that so we'll see if there's any more punitive kind of things, but it seems like he's back in the good graces. And he did get yelled at by Brian Ferentz for not getting out of bounds and running a 2-minute drill the other day. He had a nice catch, and then he was running down the sidelines, and he turned back in, and Brian wanted him to get out of bounds because they were doing a 2-minute drill, and so Brian lit him up. So yeah,
I mean, my reaction to him being on the field was, this kid must have good character underneath what was a really stupid series of mistakes, because I can't imagine. I mean, after what I heard, after the police report, how many weeks ago that was, I thought there was a chance we may not see him in an Iowa form again, just given the circumstances. And for him to be back on the field like 3 weeks later just really took me off guard. So, I guess that's a positive thing. I mean, that tight end position is going to be a fairly interesting battle for tight end too.
Yeah, the tight end position is going to be interesting this year with, Sam Laporta obviously being the lead guy there. He's, the number 1 tight end, but then you've got Luke Lachey. You're waiting to see if Yelverton can be that next guy. I think he'd ideally be the 3rd guy. They're going to want to have 3 or 4 guys that they can work in there this year. And I think that's going to be important too. The thing that they've got to find, I think, is kind of that blocker guy that they haven't had for a couple of years. And they're going to have to find the blocking wide receiver too, because, Brandon Smith was a terrific blocker. And that's why he was getting the most snaps out of the wide receivers, was because they could count on, with his 6'3", 210-pound chiseled frame, he could move people around. And that's why Iowa averages 4.5 yards per carry, is because they can get those guys open at the second level. Now, who's going to do that this year? Is it going to be Nico Reganey? Is it going to be Tyrone Tracy? Somebody else? Charlie Jones? Who's going to be the guy that does the dirty work?
Well, physically, I mean, Desmond Hudson fits the bill.
He does,
but he doesn't seem to be. You hear about guys that get brought up, and obviously the freshmen with Harlan Bruce and Keegan Johnson seem to be the guys that everybody likes to talk about right now. But with Charlie Jones and Cooper returning, I just wonder, is Hudson going to be able to gain enough leverage to make it into that? Because I think physically he is the only guy that I see looking up and down the roster that can maybe fit that bill, that image that Smith kind of filled.
Yeah, frame wise, he's the guy. Although Charlie Jones he's sneaky tall. I think he's pretty big.
Keegan Johnson isn't small. I mean, he's 6'1". But yeah, I mean, he's also 6'1", but he's a true freshman. So yeah, I mean, this summer is going to be crucial for a lot of these guys from a physical standpoint. What did you see as far as the offensive line? I mean, I know, again, talked about Britt. You talked about Cody Ince being out. Jack Plum, from what I saw, looked good. He's going to be obviously a big part of their bookend tackle persona, and certainly that right tackle position. I mean, with Ince being out, was it Mason Richmond that ran a lot at right tackle during spring ball?
Yeah, and so I think after Linderbaum, Mason Richmond, I'm kind of putting my toe in the water on a couple of bold predictions this year. So I think Mason Richmond after Linderbaum is going to be the next kind of great Iowa offensive lineman.
Okay.
He's just got all the makings. Everybody loves him. He's the rocket ship that is Mason Richmond. You might want to buy the stock now.
Yeah.
Because I think he's going to be the guy out of this group. And you get an indication of that last year when he's traveling as a true freshman and working with the twos.
Yeah.
In pregame, that you're like, yeah, okay, they're putting a rocket on his back a little bit, and he's coming. So, the thing with the offensive line, if you talk to Brian and to Kirk over the years, they will tell you that the most important position is the center position, and that's where you want your best guy.
Yeah.
That's what he's at. Linderbaum's the best center in the country.
Yep.
Everybody else is fighting for second place with that, in my opinion. And you can build around him. Kyler Schott, the shooter at left guard. They'll find something good to throw in there at right guard. And I thought Plum, Richmond were okay. I think that either Cody Ince or Britt are going to be the starter. One of the starting positions that's open. I just think it's going to be hard to keep Mason Richmond off the field. I just do. I think it's going to be. He might slide down to guard and play there this year. That's kind of what they've done a lot of times over the years with guys getting their feet wet. Brian Balaga was a guard early on. Reef, guys like that kind of you saw were going to be pretty good. You don't see many guys like Tristan Wirfs that get kind of tossed out there early on and just say, hey, go ahead, here you go.
Right.
So yeah, I think the O-line has a chance to be really good. I just, I think Goodson's going to be terrific this year. He, bold prediction, he was thrown out. It's going to be the Doak Walker thing. So, I mean, where you're at, that's going to get some headlines in Central Iowa when he's talking about that, when Breece Hall was a finalist for that position for that award last year.
I think this state boasts probably the best duo of running backs. I mean, that's just me throwing that out there. I guess I haven't examined. I mean, I know Texas is, they've got plenty of good ones, I'm sure, down there. But between Hall and Goodson, it's a pretty strong pair.
They were both first team all conference backs last year in two of the better conferences in America. So you've got a case that Brees Hall and
So
it's funny that Brees Hall was recruited by Iowa too pretty heavily, and Iowa decided to go with Goodson. And there was a feeling that had they not got Goodson, that Brees Hall might have come to Iowa. So
yeah,
but at that point, Iowa was only taking one back.
yeah,
So and they ended up taking two. That kid's gone. So
right. Yeah, Shadrick. I wonder with what we have at. I mean, when you look up and down the roster at running back, Gavin Williams, you got the kid from Des Moines that's not here yet, right? The late commit. Who do you see emerging as LaShawn Williams? Obviously, who do you see emerging as running back too? Or obviously besides Ivory Kelly Martin. I mean, I'm dismissing him because he's out right now, but I mean, who else besides Kelly Martin do you see emerging?
I think it's going to be Gavin Williams, just based on what we've seen. And the way Kirk talked the other day was that it seems like Gavin Williams is securely in that next spot. And if Ivory Kelly's not ready to go, they're going to go to Gavin Williams. Now, having said that, I don't think it's going to be as much of a shared job as it was last year with Hawkeye and Goodson. I think we're going to see, this is one of those years where it's going to be 75% Goodson and then 25% Ivory Kelly or Gavin Williams.
Yeah. I was surprised. I was surprised, honestly. We saw as much Hawkeye Sargent last year, but I mean, the dude can run. I mean, the dude can play.
Hard. He ran hard,
he did.
Angry, and he's a tough nut. So, and we should mention, the also Monty Pottebaum at fullback, who I thought did a terrific job last year, opening some holes for Tyler and Hawkeye. And that helped them get to that 4.5 yards per carry goal that they had set in the preseason.
And you mentioned Mason Richmond. I thought Cody Ince had a terrific year last year.
Yeah.
And interior, I always say, as an Iowa guy, I'm always more concerned with the interior of the Iowa line. I think I'm gun shy from 2019 when Iowa just continued to get destroyed over and over and over again. I think it was Michigan, Penn State back to back. And when you get pressure up the middle, that's the hardest to counteract. So yeah, I mean, I always kind of cringe a bit when I think of Ince moving to the outside at tackle simply because he excelled last year on the interior. But you're right, Pottebaum really made a difference. And I don't know, it'll be interesting to see too with the Wildcat. I saw a little bit of that again over some snaps this spring. If that increases, if that's something that Kirk is comfortable with Brian sort of unleashing a bit more, because when Ivory Kelly Martin's health is a big factor there. I don't know who else they're comfortable with running in the backfield with Goodson right now. Did you see anybody who ran behind or with Goodson in that formation on Saturday? Did you see?
I can't even remember who it was. I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was Gavin, but okay. That's one of those formations where they may bring out Tracy, like last year. I think they had Tracy back there a few times or here. And by the way, Tyron Tracy, I think is going to have an all Big Ten level year. I think he's just super poised he just looked like he was at a different level in practice. The first practice, he didn't practice at all this past weekend. I was shocked that they had Goodson in pads on Saturday, because I'm just like, you're tempting fate by rolling him out there and letting him get hit and just, one bad plant and he's in getting his ACL done. So you just, I know Kirk's like, you can't treat it that way. You can't think that way. But I just remember that one year, God, I can't remember what year it was, Barkley Hill running down the side, at the end of spring practice, and just towards the very end of it, and he's running and blows out his knee, and his whole trajectory of his career changed. Yeah,
the depth at running back concerns me, given the unknowns. I mean, I everything I've seen from Gavin Williams, certainly Kirk thinks very highly of him. But Ivory Kelly Martin, his health is a concern of mine too. So, I just, yeah, that's another thing I'm gun shy about is Iowa staying healthy at running back. There have been too many years. I think of the Mikhail McCall situation with him getting hurt. I think that what year was that? Like 2012 or something, where Iowa was. I don't even know who they ended up playing. That might have been like the Damon Bullock, McCall. I think who else would have been on that team. That was after. Was that might have been Hampton? Was that Joel Hampton's year too? Maybe that was 2011. But I mean, you can lose 2 or 3 running backs in the first month of the season. And I just wonder, I mean, Iowa they don't have a ton of running backs on this roster. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see, can Gavin Williams progress? I mean, because who's to say? I mean, Kelly Martin's going to be gone next year. I mean, I'm assuming, right? And you're going to potentially, I mean, you could potentially lose Goodson. So Gavin Williams, I would hope would step up, and I don't know. After that, I think it's a big question mark.
It's amazing to me that running backs aren't lining up at Iowa to come down.
Yeah,
it's one of those oddities. It was like the tight end thing for a while, the offensive tackle thing for a while, because there's just not many places that run the ball like Iowa does. There's just not. It's all spreadish and everything, and there's nobody that does it like Iowa does. Very, very few places that do it like Iowa does, the old school way, where if you're back, you love it because you're going to get 20 touches and you're going to get to run the ball a lot, and they're not going to throw it all over the yard. And it amazes me sometimes that.
Well, they've been close. I mean, I think of Melvin Gordon. I think of Eno Benjamin. I mean, these guys went on to have ridiculous careers. I mean, Benjamin hasn't really lit the NFL on fire, but what the records he set at Arizona State, and certainly Melvin Gordon. I mean, it's really too bad. But Goodson's starting to maybe break that trend a bit.